Good morning all, good afternoon, good evening, happy Thursday, happy Friday. Welcome to the Stanford Text Technologies and Stanford University Libraries co-hosted seminar on sort of medieval manuscripts made modern, I suppose. We're just I'm going to waffle for a minute or two to let people sort of trickle in, and you should all be able to see both me and my cat tree and Cheryl Jacobsen up and across in Iowa. I'm in California, so it's 10 a.m. midday with you, Cheryl, right?
Yep, it's noon.
Midday. So we're very glad to have everybody join us, and I know that people will continue to turn up. We ran a couple of these kind of co-hosted sessions last year. You can see, well, you cannot see, but you can sort of see Ben Albritton, who's the curator of special collections at Stanford University Libraries, and he and I are the main collaborators here and on a variety of projects. Last year we had a few seminars, including one by Lisa Fagan-Davis, you might remember, on fragments. And this year, Cheryl Jacobsen is the first of a number of seminars. We're hoping to run one in November and again in December, and then a couple in the winter and spring quarters in 2022, really focusing on scribes and scribal practices and different kinds of manuscripts or scrolls, rolls, documents, and thinking about scribal cultures, scribal traditions across the global corpus that makes up the human record. So keep an eye out for those. We tend to use Twitter is our main, Twitter and the library website are our main kind of marketing spaces, but a new text technologies website, I think it went live last night at 5 p.m, but I forgot to look at it. So I hope it's functioning, but all of our events are also put on that text technologies site. So to business, I'm glad to see everybody here. It's fantastic. Thank you so much for coming to hear from Cheryl Jacobsen. Cheryl is adjunct professor at the University of Iowa Center for the Book, and an artist, a calligrapher, a book artist in her own right and in her own practice. And I just love your space there, Cheryl. It's just absolutely beautiful. It looks like such a kind of creative light and room and so on. And I've known Cheryl for, it's coming up for, gosh, it's 14 years. I think it's 13 or 14 years from the Obermann Center.
Yep.
Seminar that Jonathan Wilcox, Professor John Wilcox at the University of Iowa, seminar that he arranged, the Obermann seminar, I think it was 2008, and it was on the materiality of the book, and then a volume of collected essays called Scraped, Stroked and Bound came out with Brepols in 2013, really from that seminar. And that was where I first met Cheryl and another scribe, Karen Gorst, Tim Barrett, the paper scholar, Gary Frost, the book conservator, Jesse Meyer, the owner of Pergamena, the parchment maker, and together with John Wilcox and a number of other medievalists, including Matt Hussey and Jennifer Borland and Patrick Connor and Constance Berman, we spent 2 weeks, if you can imagine this, 2 weeks making things. We scraped parchment, we made paper out of rags, we learned how to make ink from crushed walnut that Cheryl provided, we learned how to sharpen quills, we learned how to write different scripts. And that just seems, first of all, a world ago, but also just, it was such an incredible opportunity. And to work with Cheryl was actually kind of, in a sense, intellectually career changing, I think, for many of us who participated, to learn from a practitioner what it meant to practice script instead of the kind of very observing role that I normally have as a paleographer. So Cheryl's work is just extraordinary. And today she's going to talk to us about one of her newest projects on the Beowulf manuscript. And for those of you who are interested in the dating of Beowulf, that is not an issue, right? The dating of Beowulf, it dates to around 1010, 1015, 1020 if you want to think alongside Kevin Kiernan. So that's plenty of time for everybody to have arrived. I think I've waffled remarkably well, and I would like to hand over to my wonderful friend and colleague, Cheryl, to tell us all about the things that she's been up to for the last long while. Cheryl, over to you.
Thanks, Elaine. And I'm going to talk more about that seminar too. That was really life-changing for me too, and everything's come out of that. It's pretty amazing. Before I start, I thought I would just, and I just showed Ben and Elaine this, just so you can get an idea of the scale. I just got this manuscript back from the binder. Jim Downey in Missouri bound this 7-pound chunk of Beowulf. It's wrapped in leather. This is Grendel's arm that you can pull out, just so you get an idea of the scale of this project that I did. This is in Anglo-Saxon or English Vernacular Minuscule. Can I say Anglo-Saxon just because it's easier?
No.
Can I say EVM?
EVM is good. And also, sorry, Cheryl, for interrupting you. Of course, I forgot to tell everyone, if you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And then we'll get to questions after Cheryl's finished. I'm so sorry, Cheryl.
Oh, that's okay.
That is all I have to say. No, say EVM. EVM is good.
EVM. Okay, I will say that. Cool. Anyway, just so you can sort of see that I really do have this big mass quantity of goat skin found in wood. But let me share my screen. Oh, can everybody see that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Cheryl.
Good. So I'm here to tell you about this amazing commission that I have, but I need to do a little bit of backstory first. So here in 1999, I was commissioned by this guy I'll call Jim to do a 55-page book on the writings of the Jesus seminar. And it was pretty much what this seminar thought that Jesus had said, not what somebody said, he said, but just what they thought. Like I said, it was about 55 pages. I had really never used vellum before. I was like a lot of scribes that would have a little tiny piece of vellum that was in a plastic baggie that we just never touched because you never think you're good enough and you're going to save it for when you're good. This project was wonderful because I had skins and I learned how to use it and I learned not to be as scared of it. And so I did this in my own Gothic cursive, and all the illustrations which he wanted all incorporated the actual words of the facing text. So I didn't want to draw the disciples or attempt to, personify Jesus. So this was a really big book, but it was just pretty much a commission. And here's the charter I actually designed and made for the Obermann Center that Elaine was just talking about, and everybody was there. Matt Hussey actually wrote an amazing song about the whole thing, which I wish we could have him read at some point. That would be great. But this is where it really was life-changing, like Elaine said, and to bring together scholars and material people and to talk and eat and have beers with and rub off on each other was really amazing. And I think it's kind of things were starting to change, and materiality was becoming more important in manuscript studies, I think. I mean, as far as what I can see. One of the participants was Pat Connor of West Virginia University, and he was studying matched scribal hands, and he said, would you be able to completely copy a manuscript exactly like the original? And I said, yeah, I think I can. And so I attempted, and on this one, I actually used, I used vellum, you can see, but obviously my work is on the right here, and you can see it's very different vellum, but I used a quill, and I tried to copy as accurately as I could down to the thick and thinness of every downstroke to try to make it so it was exact. And after I finished, he said, yeah, you mastered it and it was wonderful. But I said, no, I really didn't master it, because mastery, as far as a scribe is concerned, is just looking and writing words, where here I wasn't even writing letters. I was writing every single stroke. And it was very challenging, especially because of the spacing. And I knew I wanted to get every single line right. But that sort of started me on this whole EVM journey. After that, John Wilcox, who is here at the University of Iowa, had me do certificates for the then International Society of Anglo-Saxonists, which I think has changed its name too. And Elaine actually commissioned this, she gave me an Anglo-Saxon riddle, which you can see, I can't remember what number it was, but what I did is I took a piece of vellum, wrote out a page of the Exeter book, sanded most of it off to sort of give you a palimpsest feel, and wrote the riddle on top in EVM and then in English coming down here, and added some gold leaf. That was a really fun. It's quite large too. It's about 2 feet high, I think, if I remember. So anyway, I have this sort of EVM thing creeping up into my world. And when I got this commission, which actually this guy told me about it, the commissioner, Jim, he had said, I want you to do Beowulf in its translation, and I want you to do Gilgamesh in its translation. And really, when I tell people I do this, they react like Pat Connor did here. Just like, why would you, who would want to do that? It's crazy. Why would you want to do it? But I sort of felt, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it. My dad was really sick with cancer at the time, and I was really feeling the pressure of this huge commission that I wasn't even sure if I could pull off. Beowulf is 140 pages, and I had to do both Beowulf and the translation. So that's a lot of writing, even for somebody who's used to doing this sort of book work. In case you don't know, the actual Beowulf manuscript is part of a collection put together by Sir Robert Cotton, who had donated his library to Britain to be established with the British Museum. You guys, if I'm making a mistake with any of this, just let me know, because I'm just learning about all this too. Here, I think this is interesting. This part, you know, it's the British Museum Cotton collection, and it was this particular book sat under the bust of Vitellius on the first shelf, 15th book over. Now, when it was in his collection, whoops, wrong one. At the time, it was stored in a house that they considered a fire trap. So they moved all these books to a place called the Ashburnham House, which then in 1731 continued to burn, and they were tossing the books out of the windows, and so they got wet and they got burned on the edges. So this book now, this Nowell Codex, exists within paper frames, so it's not bound anymore, and they've done studies about how it probably would have been, but right now you can sort of see it's in paper frames, which has protected it so that the edges don't continue to crumble off. But you can see that the frame itself covers some of the manuscript, so you can't see everything, but really it's amazing how much you can still see. So like I said, it's 140 pages. So once I decided to start doing this, there's a lot of tedious prep work that goes into it first. So I did screenshots of every single page and sized it to be as accurate as I possibly could. So I loaded those in a binder. And I had then I had to actually print out all the transcriptions that I got actually from Kiernan's website. I'll tell you more about that. And so these were references that I used constantly because I needed to have both the images and the words there. I can't read EVM, so I had to have a lot of help. So here's a screenshot of the British Library's website. And this was so handy. The color's so good, and you can blow the images up to about 300%. So I could really, really see what every single stroke was. So I used that for screenshots and for just going really in close. But the other website is by Kevin Kiernan. And I don't know, I honestly don't know how this was all put together because it's mind-blowingly thorough. You can, if you go up here, you can hear somebody reading it in EVM. You have every page broken down so you can see broken up into half lines. Let's go. And then you see the corresponding page on the right. So you can see anything you want, and you can arrange these differently. Plus, if you click these little symbols above here, it actually comes up with different sorts of lighting situations and ways to see the letters that are hidden by the frame or letters that have been crumbled away. You can also see early transcriptions. Oh, well, I'll tell you about that in a second. Both the guy who commissioned it and John Wilcox used the Seamus Heaney translation. So that's what I used. Now it's interesting, in that book, it matches the EVM with the English, but not specifically lined up like the original pages. So first I had to go through and mark exactly where each page started and stopped. And then since I can't read it, John Wilcox went through and told me approximately where the English broke. So that was also another tedious process. And then ordering calfskin. I used calfskin because it was a little bit cheaper than calfskin. I used goatskin, I'm sorry. Goatskin because it was a little cheaper. And I got it from Pergamena, which is the company that Elaine was talking about, the guy who came and actually taught us how to scrape vellum. And you can see me here back in that, I think it was 2009, doing it. And working on, I mean, I got to really, really love working on skins. Like I said, before that first book, it just wasn't something I ever thought of. But after working on that first book, I started doing fine art on it, and you can get layering and you can fix mistakes. And it's just so sensually beautiful. It's just a joy. And you can see this is one load of skins here. Just want to say, I think I used about 27 goat skins for this book. Now, for people who don't really know how books are put together, they are usually done by folding sheets of paper or skins and then sewing them together. Oh, this drives me nuts. Sewing them together, these sections together, which is how I was going to do that. And each section of my book was made of 2 folded or bifolio sheets. To keep track of all of that, I had to make this very simple dummy so I could always know which page went where, because obviously only the ones in the middle section would be consecutive. And you could really make a bad mistake if you put the wrong page in the wrong place. So I had to have this dummy book with me all the time to make sure I was doing the right page. Figuring out how many bifolios you can get out of a skin is usually a puzzle as well. So I was pretty fine with incorporating some of the wonkiness of a sheet. You can get more if you let it go over the edge. So if you, I'll show you later, but the pages I've let have holes and have irregular edges so I could get more out of each sheet. And I wasn't really too concerned if it had markings like this. Actually, you can see it had the goat markings on it. I find when I show people, it's a good way to let them know that it's not just paper. People look at it and go, wow, what kind of paper is that? And say, no, it's vellum. And even with that, then they go, oh, you mean the plastic stuff that you get? It's like, no, 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 this is actually made of animal skins. And some skins are pretty small, can only get 3 bifolio out of this one. So here is that load of skins cut up with all the excess, which is handy for doing testing, and folded and ready to start working on. I bought the vellum so that it was prepared on both sides and it was ready for writing pretty much. I still had to use some 220 grit sandpaper to get the surface to be just what I wanted. And I also used a tree resin called Sanderac to rub into the paper, to the skins, to give it a little bit more resistance. Sometimes it's a little too slick. And actually both sides of vellum are usually really different, and almost every piece of vellum is really different. So usually I had to do some kind of fussing with it to get it to work right. So here, if I was being really true to a medieval scribe, which I've never pretended to be, and I don't want to be, I really should have been using a quill and iron gall ink. But I've never been able to reliably find good quills to use. I've never had a great success at curing quills where you stick it in hot sand and clarify it. I love writing with quills, but it just wasn't a reliable enough tool for me to do over 280 pages. So I used a steel browse nib like you see here, and I used gouache. Iron gall ink for me didn't always, at least this didn't work on the page with the sort of control that I liked. And again, I was being practical, so I used what I'm comfortable with. For people who are not scribes, I like to show this because I'm always surprised how little people who look at manuscripts all the time don't really understand how the broad edge pen works, and however you hold that broad edge pen changes the weight of your letters. So just because you have a downstroke that is really, really skinny doesn't necessarily mean that you're using a really thin pen. Obviously, all these strokes were made with the same pen, and you can always see, well, not always, but usually you can see how the scribe was holding their pen just by looking at the edges of the strokes, which you can see here and here and here. And you can see here how just changing the angle of the pen changes the weight of the writing. So these strokes are skinnier looking than these strokes. And it changes the shape of things as well. And that's one of the ways that I felt like the old scribes were holding my hand and showing me exactly what to do. There are some earlier transcriptions. I was going to be doing a transcription of Beowulf. And early on, let's see, when were they? The end of the 18th century, there was a Danish man called Thorkelin, and he had hired they think someone who worked for the British Library to actually copy out Beowulf. And that's the one you can see here, Thorkelin A. I relate to Thorkelin A because he didn't know how to read EVM, and I don't either. So he was copying just what he was looking at without making too many executive decisions. He also made a lot of the same stupid mistakes I made at the beginning, which we'll talk about later. But I think he really did try to recreate what he saw. And then later on, Thorkelin actually made his own transcription, and you can see he was using a more script hand. My goal was to be as exact as possible, like what the scribes did. So to do that, I set up my workstation so that I could zoom in using the British Library's website, usually, because like I said, that could get bigger and I could really see what was going on. Down here, I'd have a light box, and I'd use those copies that I made of the screenshots to put underneath my vellum so I could at least get the spacing right. When I was doing that work for Pat Connor, the hardest thing I felt was pushing the letters together and actually getting it so my lines weren't too long. And you can see it's not like looking through tracing paper. Here's this F that I was copying. So I had the words up on the screen, and then I had the actual words right below where I was writing so I could keep track of things. And so here you can see that F barely, but it helped me to sort of place the letters in the right place. So it was a lot slower than just writing. One of the interesting things of this manuscript is that there are two scribes, at least two scribes. Somebody else may have gotten their hands in there at one point, but there are two scribes. There's Scribe A, which you see over here on the left, and Scribe B. And at about 175 V, they just changed. So you can see here this middle inset, you've got the first scribe, and then you've got the second scribe. So you've got these two things, and it's interesting now. I got really attached to the first scribe. Supposedly that was a more inexperienced scribe, now that I've been reading up on it, using a more modern hand. So this has a lower X height, which means the body height of the writing is lower. He had a slight slant to his writing, and it was supposed to be more contemporary. I found that this scribe was so inconsistent with both its spacing of letters and words and the pen angle. So his thicknesses changed all over the place. And it was so opposite from what we as modern scribes expect as beauty. I mean, whatever. I don't think either of these hands are particularly beautiful, but I learned to have really a lot of respect actually for both of them. But I think that the second scribe, who was supposedly the older guy and who used an older hand, he was doing a square minuscule, which feels a lot more like a Gothic hand. But yeah, it was, so I was looking and really just copying exactly what they were doing. And I often made silly mistakes, but here you can see how these same words written by the two scribes go. Scribe B's pen was thicker, but he was also more consistent. You can see how the patterns that are established are much more regular with Scribe B than with Scribe A. And when you look really close, both of these words were done right next to each other on the same page, and how much the pen angle just changes this. Why were they doing this? Maybe he just didn't care, or he was going really fast. I'm not sure. And you can see some other changes. When you've got a really, really steep pen angle, you can always see that the downstrokes here, or the minims as you guys call it, or I'm saying you guys as the scholars, I usually say downstrokes as a calligrapher, but you can see like the shoulders and the butts of letters tend to be really, really fat, and the downstrokes tend to be really skinny. So this is all Scribe A, and you can just see the variations that happen. So here also, I've been reading up about it and just people talking about the quality of the writing. And for me, even though I think our modern eye tends to like this more open page, I think real beautiful, competent writing can be light and can be heavy, but you really want to have a solid rhythm and a texture and a pattern sort of mixed with a freedom that I think Scribe B has more of. And so here, there's still weird things though. When you're looking at this, you're going around, you can see the pen angle, you can see how heavy the scribe was writing. Then all of a sudden you get to this word, the M and the I here. It's like, what tool were they using there? And then you go back to a fat pen. I don't know how that was going on. And so whether he got a bad quill and had to change it and went back then to a broadage pen, or maybe just did the whole thing with the corner of the nib. I'm not sure. There's all sorts of mysteries involved with all of this. because we just don't know. Come on, there we go. So with that set up in front of my computer, I didn't need to make any guidelines because I was actually just following what the original was doing. You can see this powder here is some of that sanderac that I was using. And you can see the translucency of the vellum. So I did all the EVM knowing that eventually I would have to put the English. And I was really concerned that I wanted the English to fit into the same rectangular text block that the EVM established. So I mentioned that all vellum, every sheet of vellum, every side of vellum is really different. And you could see those sorts of things as you were writing. These letters F-A-E-R here on both sides. Oh, stop it. Oh. There, well, actually, I wanted to go back to this to talk about guidelines. Sometimes the guidelines were so intense that it actually pulled the scribe's ink, making it look like there were little serifs. Sometimes you could barely see it. And actually, most of the time, you couldn't see any guidelines at all. So I'm not quite sure how they worked that. But like I said, I didn't need to use guidelines when I was doing the EVM. And here you can see the differences. I had pieces of vellum that were really, really fuzzy. And so my consistency wasn't great. And so did they, but it was impossible to match up, fuzzy vellum to fuzzy vellum and greasy vellum to greasy vellum. It just is hard. And you can see here areas where it looked like the vellum was possibly wet. I don't know. I've never had to wash vellum to get paint off. It's wonderful in that the mistakes I made, I just scraped off with a knife and resanded and added some more sanderac. So you really couldn't even see my mistakes. But these guys made mistakes and it was really hard to even think about. Sometimes it was obvious. They'd put a little dot and they'd put the new letter in. But I don't get this. If you wipe this off, and it really looked like it was wiped off, which I wouldn't do, and then you write this up here, I'm not quite sure why they just didn't put it down here, but supposedly Scribe B did a lot of the correcting on Scribe A's work. And why they didn't scrape more stuff off, I don't know. So then you get to fitting the English on. And I really wanted to keep this book and the pages as close to the original as possible, which meant I had to write really, really small in the English because Haney's translation was much wordier and tended not to use any abbreviations like the EVM did. So here you can see my first version of this page. I was just writing too big and I wasn't happy. I had to use an italic hand and really, really make it as simple as possible and as small as possible. As you can see, I went over the side. So I had to scrape this all off and rewrite. And I found I had to constantly think about writing as small as possible all the time, and managed to fit most of it in pretty well. The very, very last page, it's pretty obvious that the scribe was running out of room because they added a line and they started using way more abbreviations when they were doing it. You can also see the wonkiness of the page here, that the fire created distortions, and I actually followed those when I was doing the book. Later on, I did some pages where I straightened everything out, but you can see how much English, and I did have to break out of the text blocks because there was just so much English to fit on the page. But it worked. This was the most dense page and we got it all on. And you can see all my notes here. I did take a lot of notes in the margins. Some of it was timing when I actually did it, and I wrote all that down in the margins. Usually a page of EVM took me about between an hour and 15 minutes and an hour and a half. The English went quicker. but I erased like 30 pages of the English because I was so unhappy with it. There's a point in Beowulf where, I mean, all of Beowulf is a poem, but there's a song in it. And in Seamus Heaney's translation, he puts the song in italic. Since I was already writing in italic, I had to find another hand. So I sort of did a script at one point. I didn't like that. So then I used the Gothic cursive that I used in that really early book, because I could make it very, very small. And it has this sort of lyricalness too of a song that I thought fit really well. One of the great things about working on vellum is that you can erase it and you have a completely new writing surface, usually. I mean, if you overdo it, it can be too fuzzy and it'll get really hard to write on. And you can also wear a hole through it, which I did in a few pages, because some pages I erased 3 times. Here, in some of the test pages that I used, I actually did this erasing by hand, which took probably 45 minutes to get to a really clean page, and it really hurt my wrist. So I thought, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to move on and actually use a power sander. And that really helps. But it's very, very messy. I did it in my basement at first, and then I did it here in the garage. But then I moved outside, because even with a mask, and I felt guilty here because this is an N95 mask and COVID had just hit, and I was keeping this for myself so I didn't inhale too much skin dust. So this is what a page spread looks like. And you can see here, I did make lines for the English. These marginal notes are actually what Seamus Heaney puts to tell you what's going on in the book. Ended up being about 4 inches thick pile of goat skin. I finished it last summer. And it was really handy. When COVID hit, all my normal jobs dried up. So it was really handy to just be cloistered in my studio, just writing Beowulf out. Worked out really well. So here you can see the very last page and all the damage it's sustained. This is the last page of the book. And then after it was all done, and I have to say, we've mentioned John Wilcox several times. This book wouldn't have been worth anything without him. He did so much work. He proofed the whole thing. He just helped me in so many ways that really made this a substantial thing worth doing. So he had asked me to do some pages for him, but all in EVM. So then I went back and I did the pages that were around where the 2 scribes switched. I did another page where there was a palimpsest that I don't have any pictures of this, where evidently somebody had washed or scraped a lot of it off. And then another scribe had sort of poorly written on top. And it's sort of a mystery of what was really going on there. But so he wanted that. And then he wanted this last page. And this was fun because I could actually straighten everything out. By this time, I was pretty good at the writing. I didn't mistake W's for P's anymore, because a win looks a lot like a P. And there are other letters that we are just not used to working with as modern scribes. But I could then straighten all the lines out, so the last page actually looked like it might have looked when the scribes were doing it. I added a title page. Beowulf doesn't have a title page, but there's some natural holes in the vellum. There are holes in Beowulf too, and a lot of those holes actually came from embers burning holes in it. And then after it was done, I sent it away to the binder in Missouri, and he just started sewing all the sections together, and he was sending me all sorts of pictures. He's got a nice description. If you go to James Downey Bookbinder, you can see a whole he writes out everything he did for this project. Oh, I just love that picture. And there it is. So it doesn't give you, so it's about 7 pounds of book. So there you go. I can take questions now.
Cheryl, thank you so much. That's absolutely wonderful. I love are those oak boards on that binding?
I have to ask, I'm not quite sure what kind of wood it is. The guy who commissioned it, like I said, this guy collects all sorts of stuff, and we had gone into a barn, just one of his outbuildings besides the medieval village in his backyard, where he had all sorts of boards. He also makes electric guitars, so he uses the wood for various things, and he has bombs and ceramics and like a 8-foot sexy Sailor Moon doll. So it's just all sorts of weird things, but he had all this stuff. So once we saw, he had sort of given us 3 choices, but once we saw this piece of wood, we thought, oh, that's it, that's it. And then the binder actually used a laser to burn sort of a Viking ship head in it. It's attached to me.
Beautiful, thank you. Cheryl, I suspect we've got a lot of differently trained and different interests represented among the audience, and I just want to draw attention to what I've already put in chat. When Cheryl was talking about EVM, she's talking about English Vernacular Minuscule, and a colleague asked about the term Anglo-Saxon. First of all, it's a term that's really unhelpful for script because it denotes a kind of socio-political unit, if you like, that we tend to think of as being shut down instantaneously on actually October 14th in 1066, the Battle of Hastings. So even Anglo-Saxon in relation to the pre-1066 centuries is really inappropriate because Canute was an Anglo-Scandinavian king, and so on and so on. So quite some time ago, a number of scholars, including Peter Stokes, whose work you might be familiar with, in effect relabeled the script English Vernacular Minuscule because it makes much more sense, both in terms of the language that is always transmitted by that script, and in terms of its continuing into the 12th and actually into the early 13th century. So it's a much more kind of appropriate label, much less delimiting. In addition to that, the term Anglo-Saxon has been long used as a term of racial categorization, and it's a particularly freighted term at the current kind of climate, particularly in the Anglo-American sphere, because it's been appropriated by the alt-right and is used perniciously. And from that perspective, it's preferable to find other ways, more precise ways, and ways that are not kind of tapping into these alt-right discourses. It's better to be more nuanced, I think, about the way that we use that we describe pre-1100 England and its various kingdoms. But anyway, so that's just a clarification for everybody. So thank you, Cheryl, so much. There are questions. They're in the Q&A. Cheryl, can you see them?
Yep, I just see them now.
So Heide Estes, hi Heidi, an early English scholar, is asking why not write the modern translation in English, margin to margin, like the original manuscript, instead of in poetic lines, since Old English poetry is not written out as if it were verse lines, it's written out as if it were continuous prose. Why did you decide to write it poetically?
I was just copying what Seamus Heaney had done in his translation. Yeah, I mean, that's the reason I was breaking it up like he did. And yeah. I think having I think it would be, since it's not really word for word, it might be difficult to do it the other way. And I wasn't familiar enough with even the fact of what the rhythm or the metric rhythm was. And I think it hadn't even occurred to me to do that because I was just following what Seamus Heaney had done line for line. And I'm not even sure why in certain cases he broke things up. Like when the song happened, he would break each half line and it became really, really long. I didn't do that because I just wouldn't have room for it.
And can we unmute Haida?
Hi.
Hi, Haida.
Hi.
Sorry.
Do you want to go ahead and ask, kind of have a follow-up question or ask us a question?
Well, I mean, you pretty much answered my question about writing out the text. I was just thinking that if it would have been easier to fit if it were written, margin to margin, the way they wrote poetry in Old English. But maybe that was the way that the commissioner wanted it to be written, I guess.
I don't think he really had a preference. Well, he did want me to copy the Seamus Heaney. So I was really just doing what Heaney wanted, not necessarily what Jim wanted.
Can you talk at all about who Jim is, and whether the manuscript that you've created is going to end up in a private collection or someplace where it's publicly available?
I think it's going to go in his private collection for now. I hope it ends up in eventually I hope it ends up in special collections here at the U because they have a bunch of my other books. But right now it's mine to play around with and to take and share with people. But so far he has a big collection of manuscripts and stuff in his basement with electric guitars and ceramics. And he lives in Iowa. Yeah, well, he lives right outside of Iowa City here. It's a very interesting man. I'm very lucky to have fallen into this. I'm lucky to be in Iowa City and also to get this amazing commission.
Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I would, if your University of Iowa Center for the Book colleagues are online with us now, what I would urge the library or the colleagues at the Center for the Book is to have an exhibition of Cheryl's work that is, that has a kind of symposium or something attached to it. That would be really nice. And then all the early English scholars can pile in to have a look at the various things that you're doing and perhaps take a few lessons from you, Cheryl. It's very cheeky, but anyway, just
I'll mention that to them.
We have a question from Dawn Burgoyne. Dawn's asking, would an affordable book ever be available? And Dawn is copying out Celtic Psalter in Irish Minuscule.
Okay. Yeah.
So I wonder how that's going, Dawn. But yes, would an affordable version ever be available?
You mean a copy of this, a facsimile of this? I'm not sure if that's really, people have mentioned that. I'm not sure who would be that interested. I mean, there are enough, you can look at the facsimile of the real thing by going online. So I don't know if there is any reason I'm going to take photographs of the whole thing, but I'm not sure, this is like a lot of the books I do. And a lot of the art I do, it's kind of one of a kind. And if you make a facsimile of this, it seems kind of redundant and there's no real reason for it.
That's a really interesting question, actually, isn't it? What constitutes? It's one of the a kind of debate in medieval manuscript circles, especially in relation to the digital era now, is kind of what is a facsimile, what constitutes a facsimile. One could argue that your book is in fact itself a facsimile, very rare, and it's so rare it's a unique object. So I quite see your point, and I think it's a particularly interesting question to consider how we regard this kind of creative work in relation to to the original, especially when it's such a skilled demonstration of craft as yours, Cheryl, where you can see that effort to match the hand precisely. And in relation to matched hands, can I just ask you to, let's go back to Scribes A and B. And I know that there are people really kind of interested in scribal practice, and some of the things that you said, which are absolutely eye-opening for particularly paleographers. Oh, actually, Matt Aiello. Matt, can we unmute Matt Ben, please? Hey, Matt.
Hi.
Matt.
I was just curious. I was really taken and pleased to hear, sorry, I have construction going on outside, but to hear your observation about Scribe A's spacing and how it was a bit more erratic. And I'm wondering, can you recall any specific bits of the text where the spacing was particularly erratic, or was it just sort of random? Because it holds so many like neat observations about their possible familiarity with both the language and the script. And I think you mentioned might have been a not less professional, but maybe a more junior scribe that was then taken over by Scribe B. But it's such a neat observation that holds a lot of meaning, I think.
Yeah, to me, especially when I was doing it, felt very erratic. I mean, I'm going back through and really looking at things now again with the experience of doing it, but it felt very erratic in that, sometimes there was a huge space between words and sometimes there was a space within words, but again, I can't read it. So I wasn't sure if any of this had to do with the meter of the poem and how it was actually supposedly read aloud. So I don't know enough to really say that, but I really couldn't see any pattern to the inconsistency. It just sort of felt like when my students are writing, one of the things I really push for them is to get a pattern and to keep to it, whether it's a regular pattern, like a marching band, that's the really simple type thing. And a lot of calligraphy is like that. But even if you have sort of a more inconsistent pattern, and it's still, an arrhythmic pattern, I would just so there's a da 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 da. I mean, that can be really, really amazing too, if you're looking at writing. But I didn't see any pattern to this. It was like sometimes there was big holes and sometimes there wasn't, and sometimes the pen angle was really, really steep, and sometimes it wasn't, and sometimes they were really jammed together with no reason because there was space after it. So I don't know. It just seemed a mystery that I'm still really interested in looking at. I'm not really ready to stop doing this yet. Was there ever a time when I wanted to stop or think, why am I doing this? Just because there was a lot of time invested, of course, and there must have been frustrations going, yes. I never wanted to stop. I really honestly never wanted to stop. I have enjoyed this in a really kind of strange way, and don't even really want to stop now, even with the other projects that I have sort of looming over me. I was frustrated all the time. First, the sort of dissonance that a person who's used to being a scribe that makes things that are beautiful and perfect with freedom. Calligraphy is defined in some cases as disciplined freedom. You get the craft down and then you do beautiful things with it, and it's free and it's beautiful and it doesn't look labored. I was laboring every single step, and it never felt, I was trying to be so accurate, and it's never, of course, perfect, but so I got frustrated that way. I got frustrated feeling like maybe I should not have I'm good at guilt. So I was like, well, a really good person would be able to just look at the writing and not have to have that cheat for the spacing underneath. But I know from doing that other page, it would have taken me 5 times longer if I didn't have that sort of spacing help behind my writing. And I got really frustrated also with the English. When I do italic writing, I I love it to be beautiful. And this had to be so spiky, and I think F's were a little bit fun, but most of it, there was just no finesse to this writing. It was like, and it was, the smaller I got, the more it just wasn't, like, I don't feel like I could submit this to my calligraphic colleagues and they'd go, oh, that's really great italic, because it's just not. And I think this whole thing about what modern scribes would find interesting, probably this isn't what they would find interesting. I think if I had developed my own version of EVM, but that would be pointless because nobody can read most of the strange letters. And if you converted the strange letters to regular modern English, it wouldn't mean anything. And the letters themselves are not that unusual or beautiful. So yeah, I had all sorts of frustrations. And like I said, I had to erase 30 of the English pages. But I tend to be a very patient person, and I was really excited about this and I enjoyed it a lot.
Can I just jump in with a direct question in relation to what you've just said,
Yeah.
Cheryl? I think the kind of the contemporary use of a calligraphic aesthetic for the work of medieval scribes is problematic, and it's certainly the way the paleographical field developed in the sort of 20th century, was to use these terms like good and bad and ugly for scribal effort that came about probably after considerable training, and we can talk more about that. But I'm really interested in what you're saying about it not being kind of beautiful, specifically in relation to the scribal work of the Exeter book scribe, whether we believe there's one or more scribes, they have this kind of perfect match hand, whoever they are. That is a scribe that is widely categorized as one of the most aesthetically compelling of the pre-conquest era. So you've worked with both scribes as kind of ghosts sitting behind you as you echo their work. Is there anything in particular that you could say to help us think through these kind of categories of professional, expert, beautiful, not beautiful, consistent, not consistent, in relation to those two manuscript demonstrations of scribal capability in this period?
I'd have to go back. I mean, I don't feel like I remember the Exeter book that well. What I've been thinking a lot about in this whole, of course, saying anything is beautiful is so subjective that it's really hard to say. But I feel like whether you're a modern scribe or an old scribe, because you can look at a lot of old manuscripts and feel like there is, you're looking at the texture and the pattern and the rhythm of things. And like I said, whether it's a really straightforward rhythm or a more abstract rhythm, and also the freedom of just writing. So you can see the freedom and the careless, not careless in a messy sort of way, but a sort of free way, how they're just letting things go and being very natural, which is so hard to get to, as an instructor of calligraphy, I tend to sort of push people to be very accurate at first. And even for me in my life as a scribe, I tend to be kind of, I was like, I want to do it right. I want to do it right. But then you have to let that go and let it be free. And so this combination of, perfection and freedom at the same time is really what makes things beautiful. So I think that's, and I think the Exeter scribe does have more of that consistency in the weights of its strokes and in its spacing. Although I seem to remember that spacing was a little wonky also when I was working on Pat's project, but I'd have to go back. I can't really talk about that right now because it's been a while since I've even done your project, so.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a lot more to say about that, but Catherine Riley in the Q&A is asking, she's a graduate student. Hi, Catherine. Just beginning to study manuscripts and scribal work. Are there reference books or resources you'd recommend? for a beginner?
For studying medieval scribes?
Scribal work and paleography.
I was talking to Simon Thompson about this yesterday. There's so little written about early scribes. I mean, there's just so little written, and I keep picking up books on manuscripts and paleography, and it's just almost not there. I don't know, Elaine, have you seen more? There's just not that much that really talks about even what I was talking about today, you know, the whole analyzing manuscripts. And I mean, I teach a class at the U here where we analyze manuscripts using Johnson's 7 steps, where you analyze it and you figure out, you know, the scribe work itself tells you how it was done. And that's really handy, but I don't even see that really existing anywhere in a paleography book that I've looked at. And that's been frustrating.
Yeah, I can think of a book. I'm going to try and find it on my shelf just now. So I can't remember the name of the author. It's not a book that is widely cited, but it definitely should be. Standard paleographical works, you know, for this period, you start with Neil Carr or with, what's the matter with me? My brain is mush. Julian Brown's work and the collections that contain his various essays. And obviously Malcolm Parks. And Malcolm Parks's book, Scribes Before Our Eyes, help me out people, is probably the one that is most attentive of all, sustained through the book, most attentive of all to the practice of scribes. But he, as Matt Aiello could easily tell us, he does not spend a lot of time in, for example, the 13th century. So you don't get consistent coverage from script to script or from scribal practice to scribal practice. And thank you, Simon Thompson, in the chat.
Yes, where is it? Because I was just showing Simon's book here that I just read and is really interesting. And it's been fun to talk to him about this. But what's the question?
Wonderful. Simon is just saying that their hands before our eyes. Thank you, Janice. Pat Connor's Anglo-Saxon Exeter. Pat Connor's Anglo-Saxon Exeter is one of the best books ever written on a manuscript in its cultural context, and is an absolutely phenomenally important foundational book on pre-conquest scribes and their textual production. So I urge everybody to pay close attention to that work. It came out in, I think, 92 and is an absolute classic. And Stroked and Bound, yeah. It's very good, lovely essays in that. So other questions on scribes and scribal practice while we're waiting for other people to pop up with questions. Let me just check I'm not missing somebody.
We're missing 27 goat skins. I think I spent about $3,000 on skins.
And some of them only yielded 3 bifolia.
Yeah.
Where others yielded 4? What's the most by?
I think the most was 5.
Right.
Yeah.
And it took you an hour and a half per folio, which doesn't seem very much, Cheryl. Was that kind of as you really got into your stride? Yeah.
And different it was pretty good. Yeah, I mean, an hour and a half, that's not too bad. You know, if I had been writing instead of copying every stroke, it would have been faster. So, you know, doing what I was doing was really a slow way of writing.
So Ben's just alerted me to Wilcom has a question, which I can't actually see. So I don't know what's happened to that.
Where are we looking?
I'm not sure.
I see.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for this. I just posted just before Catherine, but maybe it got mixed. Anyway, I was just wondering, and you partly answered this question saying that you're already teaching at IU, but I was wondering if you're doing more hands-on workshops with medievalists or people working with manuscripts, specifically interested in paleography. because you hardly ever get a chance to actually see how it works. And I think it greatly helps with analyzing different hands in our profession. So I was wondering if you are doing anything, just replicating some of your processes, downward strokes and different angles of the quill and things like that. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's what my history class is, exactly that. And I've done workshops like that for people. And I would love to do more of that, because I think people who look at manuscripts should know more about all of this. So I'd love to do more of that.
I was looking in the wrong place for questions, so I apologize to everybody. Piers has a question. Can you see it, Cheryl, in the open Q&A question?
Let's see.
About iSkip.
Okay, Q&A here. Oh, okay, yeah. iSkip. Yeah, yes, skipping things out. When I was doing the way I had set it up, I didn't really skip anything, because like I said, I had the actual words below me printed out, and I was looking through so I could see the spacing, I could see what I was doing. So I really didn't skip that much. I did skip, when I'm doing the English, and even on the very, very first book that I did, I found I had to, when I was looking at what I was copying, I actually made a little window. So all I could see was what I was writing, and I just moved that little window. Because in the first book that I did, at one point, I left a sentence. After I had written 30 pages, I left a sentence off of the first page. So I actually had to scrape the whole beginning off, write backwards, and then it came out nice, because then I had a nice frontispiece that started with the first words. But I skipped a whole paragraph in that too. That's when I started just using a little window, so I wouldn't do the sort of iSkip thing.
And can you see Cecilia's question about Mark?
Yeah, Mark knows. I have Mark's book. It's okay. I think I would recommend actually working from actual manuscripts instead, because I think he is, as a teacher of calligraphy and as a teacher presenting things to anybody else, you sort of have to make decisions about what you put in your exemplar. When I teach just regular italic and all that, I have a simplified version. I always tell my students, I don't write like this. This is the teaching alphabet. I've made it really simplified for you guys so you can get the basics and move on. He's made some decisions about telling you exactly what is what. I find it's much more interesting to, and handy. My class uses Stan Knight's Historical Scripts book. This is one of the few, actually, I should have mentioned this. This guy actually talks about manuscripts, and he talks about the actual writing and scribes. He gives you a whole page so you can see the margins and everything. He blows things up. He shows you the actual size of the writing, and then he tells you things about the letters that only a scribe would know how to tell you. So I recommend people look at the actual manuscripts so you can see what they're doing, and then make your own decisions of simplification. I would not like to I'm assuming the scribe was a guy, but only because a lot of them were. I have no idea. And I don't think I wouldn't guess even modern calligraphers. I mean, I can identify modern calligraphers, and I know they happen to be male or female, but I wouldn't know the difference just by looking at their writing. When I was skipping the whole paragraph, I realized that after I was 30 pages in, and I had to completely, luckily I had left room. This is the first book I did. I had left room for a large illustration. So I was way too late to notice that. But luckily I had room to extend the writing and then reduce the size of the next illustration on the page. That was just lucky. I don't know what else. I would have had to probably make some major change in what I was doing. Okay, would there be a way to predict how fast scribes would write? Yeah, I think, you know, different hands really have different speeds, and that a lot of that depends on how large the X height is, or the body height of the letter, and how much slant you have. If you're doing like a textura, very straight up and down, where you come down, you stop, you pick up your pen and you go back to the top where the branching happens, that's a really slow letter form. So you have to consider what letter form you're looking at, and then practice enough that you're not thinking too hard about how to make the letters. That's why, you know, another thing about when you learn to do calligraphy, it's really, 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 really slow. And even when you're good, it's slow, but you need to practice enough that it comes out naturally. So I think I could, you know, if you told me what hand and I practiced enough, I could probably tell you how fast a scribe would write. Copy of that book being, no, I've never seen the Irish Timothy O'Neill book. I have not seen that. I will look it up.
Just that I had mentioned a book that I think is not cited or read enough, and it's called Calligraphy and Paleography, Essays Presented to Alfred Fairbank, and edited by A.S. Osley, O-S-L-E-Y, and it's got some really extraordinary contributions by craftspeople in it. So it's a book that seeks to kind of, hang on, I'm just going to put it in chat. There you go. Oh, sorry, that's a very long link to a page on Etsy, I think, that shows us, just shows you the book. Cheryl, there's a question from Samantha.
Okay, how long did it take before you went from student to a scribe? I started studying when I was in college with an instructor named Barbrini, and she was really great. You mean scribe meaning professional, make money from it scribe? I mean, once you're a student, you're a scribe, but I mean, it's funny because you can, I find students, they start doing work for people after they take my class, whether or not they're good or not. Everybody, once you sort of know how to use a pen, everybody thinks you're great. So you can usually get jobs right away.
Jessie has just popped up, actually. Jessie, are you still here, or have you actually gone? Jessie Meyer, who owns Pergamena and makes skins for scribes and craft productions, as well as for other. Can you pop up, Jessie? Can we make?
Hi, Jessie. Where are you?
There he is.
Hi,
here. Jessie.
Can you guys hear me?
Hi. Yeah, we can't see you yet.
Hi.
For
everybody who doesn't know Jessie, Jessie is one of, I think you're the only parchment makers, am I right, in New York State? You're the only parchment makers in North America. Is that right?
I think the only professional, maybe one other, not to steal all the spotlight, but yeah, there's very few, to be sure.
And you can go to the Pergamena website, everybody who's on this call, and look at the various things that Pergamena does. But certainly, Cheryl, the majority of your material is Jessie's, right? And that
all of my material is from Jessie. Yeah.
Thanks for making it look so beautiful.
Thank you for providing it.
Jessie, it's really nice to see you. Thanks for popping up. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, Simon, Hella, you've got a question. Can you see it, Cheryl?
Is it in? Oh, yep. Again, yep. Certainly not with the EVM, since I can't read it. I probably wasn't paying enough attention to really appreciate it. I would want to read it again and just not be working. I mean, yes, I followed, but I think I would rather just sit down and read it now without writing it. Because yeah, no, I don't think I really got more from it from this than I had before. And left-handed. From my students who are left-handed and from people, professional scribes that I know that are left-handed. I know that there's a guy at Hallmark who is left-handed. I'm forgetting his name, but there are different things you can do with the left hand than you can with your right. So certain things are easier with your left. I know that he taught himself how to write ambidextrously, so he can do both. When I teach my left-handed students, I have them just orient their paper horizontal instead of vertical in front of them. And they can do almost anything. So I wouldn't call it a serious drawback. I think there are some things that are easier and some things that are harder. Pointed pen stuff, I think, tends to be harder when you're left-handed. But a lot of really, really, really great people are left-handed scribes.
Okay. Are there any other last questions? I have lots of other questions. I may not bore everybody here with my idiot questions, but everybody else's questions are much more interesting. Are there any more questions for Cheryl? I just want to say, Cheryl, that I've never heard the bows of letters, letter forms, graphs referred to as butts of letters before, and I'm taking it with me, and it will appear in my next publication shortly. Terminology that we use is so varied. It's really unhelpful. And thank you, Dawn, for reminding us about William Cowley and Newport Pagnell. Cowley's, obviously, they make parchment. You can watch a video. I think it was Stephen. I'm sorry, my mind is not functioning in full gear, but there was a program, a TV program, where they went to watch parchment making at Cowley's. It's available, bits of it are available on YouTube. So there may also be other material and other videos up there. I know that the Getty did a wonderful sequence of videos on the preparation of manuscripts, and the Three Faiths exhibition in New York Public Library that Karen Gorst was fundamental in helping to organize. They also have videos online on YouTube. Okay, so I think, yes, thank you everyone who's saying thank you. That's wonderful, and thank you everybody who has come. I think we can let Cheryl go off and do other things, get some lunch. And did you want to add something, Cheryl?
Can I just say, yeah, this is this blue book, because I missed this question. It's Stan Knight, and it's called Historical Scripts, and it's really a great book. I love this book.
There are, yeah, the London School of Paleography does do some courses in manuscript writing, and certainly the people who are at the London School of Paleography, it's special, it's at the Institute for Historical Research at Senate House, the London Rare Book School, they might actually properly call it. They might also have advice, and I'm certainly happy to, if you want to email me, I'm happy to try and point you in the direction of other resources. And there are resources online that I know Kvilkim and others have also drawn up. So we'll try and put something, and we'll tweet it. So we'll try and put something online. But Cheryl, you're an absolute star. This has been wonderful. I know the medievalists here are so thrilled to have heard the craft perspective, and I know that practitioners here have so many questions, and there've been lots of tips in the Q&A and in the chat. It's been wonderful. Thank you, Cheryl. Really appreciate it. And everybody, thank you very much for attending. And we'll let you know about the next event that we're going to be doing as part of the Stanford Text Technologies and Libraries co-hosting series of medieval manuscript seminars. Bye.
Bye.